Good afternoon and welcome to the January 18th meeting of a technical working group for the San Francisco Community Roundtable. My name is Ricardo Ortiz and we have with us our staff. We have Angela Montes and Doreen. Bear with me, Doreen. I'm having so many problems here, so sorry. Bear with me. And Doreen Stockdale, thank you, Doreen. And we also have Jean Reindell from our HMMH, our technical consultant. And we have a number of representatives from the SFO and the FAA. So with that, I will start. And I'm sorry, guys, I'm having some technical difficulties here, so bear with me. So first of all, we just want to say hi to Doreen Stockdale, who is from HMMH, and she is our interim roundtable coordinator as Ms. Rodriguez has left us. And so we want to say welcome to Ms. Stockdale, and we look forward to working with you. And with that, Ms. Stockdale, if you could confirm the members that are present.
Yes, present we have yourself, Ann Schneider with the City of Millbrae, Terry O'Connor with the City of Brisbane, Bill Widmer with the Town of Atherton, and Al Royce with the Town of Hillsborough. Also, as you mentioned, Joseph Burke with the FAA is on the call, and I just see that Sam Hindi with the City of Foster City also just checked in.
Yeah, hello, Mr. Vice Chair. And at this point, then we'll pass it to Ms. Montes, who is going to give us an explanation of how we can participate in today's meeting and how we can deal with public comments. Angela?
Thank you, Chair Ortiz. I would also like to note that we have representatives, Mr. Perkins and Ms. Wentworth from Congresswoman Jackie Spears' office.
Oh, good.
And for those attending the meeting on the Zoom video conference, we will use the raise hand feature in order to organize any public comments. During the general public comment period, and for each item on the regular agenda, I will ask those members of the public who wish to comment to click the raise hand feature to speak on that agenda item. For those joining by phone, please press *9 to indicate your desire to speak. When you hear your name called, I will prompt you to unmute your microphone and inform you that you may begin speaking. You will have 2 minutes. Members of the public, please wait for each prompt in connection with each agenda item. For example, please do not raise your hand for item 3 if you wish to speak on item 4. Any written comments that were submitted in advance will be noted by staff during appropriate agenda item. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Montes. And with that, we will move on to set the agenda and approve the consent agenda, which includes item number 2, resolution adopting findings for remote meetings. Staff will read any written comments and allow members of the public to speak. Ms. Montes, do we have any public comment?
Thank you, Chair Ortiz. We did not receive any written public comments, but I do have one hand raised from Ms. Landesman.
Okay, and Ms. Landesman, just to be clear, this is for an item that is not on the agenda, correct?
Yes, this is to speak on an item that is not on the agenda.
Perfect, thank you, please.
Good afternoon and Happy New Year. Sorry, I would like to, the screen here. I would like to again raise the issue of transparency that I brought up with you before, and how the public that stands to be affected by discussions here is not aware of what's going on. Specifically, the dismissal of my concern at a previous meeting that suggested that because these meetings are public, it somehow absolves all of the rightful outreach and engagement with the public as set out by the FAA's National Environmental Policy obligations. At the minimum, all the evaluations that you're making about noise to inform FAA decisions should really be reported out in more robust communications, such as press releases with useful information about noise levels, impacts, baselines, and also to ensure that the public is aware of the tools and the standards that you're using to assess noise. Because so far, the information that is being given to the general public is just not enough. And I see a lot of, I see serious problems with the way my concerns are being dismissed, and I hope you will take a closer look of what I'm trying to say, and I would be happy to provide more information or why I think this is a problem. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Landesman. And I believe I do have your email, so I can reach out and we can have a little more conversation about that. Thank you. And with that, Angela, do we have any other members of the public?
We do not have any more hands raised, Chair.
So with that, then we're going to move on. If I could have a motion to set the agenda and approve consent item number 1.
So move.
Second.
Okay, I heard, I believe it was Mr. Widmer was the motion and
Right.
O'Connell was the second.
Yes.
So if we could get a roll call, please.
Mr. Ortiz. Yes. Member Hindi,
Yes.
Member Schneider,
Yes.
Member O'Connell,
Yes.
Member Whitmer,
Yes.
Member Royce.
I don't think I'm a formal member of this committee, but if I can still vote, I'll vote yes, but I don't think I'm a member.
We'll take your vote any day, Al.
Your motion passes.
Great, thank you so much. And with that, we will move on to item number 2, which is the ground-based augmentation system project update. Technical consultant Jean Rydell presenting along with staff from SFO. So just to give you a little background here, we did receive a number of the procedures that have been reviewed by HMMH. And so we have some feedback from Jean as to those procedures, and then we have some updates from the SFO. So with that, I'm not sure who's going to start. Are you going to take it, Jean?
I am only going to introduce Sarah Jensen from HMMH. She was the one responsible for the review and analysis that she did, and she will be presenting. I did want to make sure that we're ready for this. Item 2 from my agenda was actually the Brown Act remote meetings resolution. Do we have to do that first?
That was under setting the agenda and approve consent items. I think
Got it. Okay.
there's a little bit of a typo. I apologize on the item you're looking at, but we are on item 3. Thank
Okay.
you.
Perfect. Okay, go ahead, Sarah.
Great, thank you. Let me go ahead and share my screen. Can everybody see my presentation?
Yes.
Yes.
Great, thank you. So as Jean said, we were able to review some of the GLS innovative approach procedures that have been published by the airport, and we wanted to give you all an update of our findings compared to what the airport has found, and also to discuss some potential recommendations that could or could not be made to potentially reduce noise even further. So the agenda quickly will just go over the background of the request that we received from the roundtable and a quick intro on the methodology that we use to review these procedures. And then we'll move into the assessments of each of these procedure groups, including the noise assessment and potential modifications that we identified and their feasibility. Then I'll just sum up the findings of this study. So as the roundtable had requested, we reviewed 9 proposed innovative approach procedures at SFO. These included Group A, the Debay runway 28R, there's one procedure there. Group B, which includes the bridge visual and the tiptoe visual, each of which has 2 proposed procedures. Group C, which is the GLS Romeo, which had 2 procedures, and then Group E, the GLS Alpha for runway 10 L and R. We didn't review Group D per the request of the roundtable in the airport, as those had not been fully released to us yet. I think there is still some work going on those, and they are a little bit more complex, so we have not reviewed those yet. The intent of this review is to basically affirm the airport's assertions regarding the changes to noise as depicted in the approach procedure documentation. We also asked to identify potential changes to these procedures that could provide further noise reductions. And finally, we wanted to just provide an informational recommendation to the roundtable regarding whether the procedures are, we thought the procedures should be pursued or not. To quickly go over the methodology, we conducted a basic review, mainly based on the approach procedure documentation provided from the airport website, and there'll be a reference to that later in the presentation. We also used existing satellite imagery and population centers to figure out what kind of estimated effect there might be on shifting flight paths and or altitudes on the different population areas of the region. We also used aviation sectional charts and instrument procedure charts as a kind of a baseline for where things are today compared to what the procedures would be expected to do. And we also talked with airport members to discuss what feasible options there were in terms of changing the flight paths and or altitudes, as well as to get a general feel for what the procedures were supposed to accomplish. We want to note that noise shifts obviously when flight paths move. So this review does include assessments of the lateral shifts as proposed in the procedures and as potentially proposed in feasible changes that we might see in this as a result of this assessment. I do want to note that we didn't conduct a rigorous technical review. This is kind of a high level overview. We didn't do any noise modeling or anything of that sort. And one of the things that we did look at in modifying the procedures, it was lateral or vertical shifts. We didn't look at how aircraft performance characteristics might affect the noise footprint. That is, say, we didn't look at how aircraft might switch the point at which they would lower their flaps or their gear or anything along those lines. In terms of the effect of that on noise. So this is strictly looking at the flight procedures themselves. And also this focuses on a potential change in single event noise levels. So it doesn't account for cumulative effects. We just looked at for a one-for-one operation. So one existing procedure flight and one proposed procedure flight, how would the noise for those differ? And then finally, just want to point out that in general, noise levels, we perceive them to the human ear. Changes of about 1 decibel is really, you can't really hear that in a general sense. And 1 to 3 decibel changes, that's barely noticeable. You get into 5 or more decibels and you start to actually see or hear rather, hear changes where change of 5 decibels is essentially, if it's louder, it's about twice as loud to the human ear, or if it's a 5 decibel decrease, it's about half as loud. So this is important when we get into the actual assessments of the noise. In some cases, you'll see there actually are some changes in the noise levels for these single events. And that's just kind of gives you a level set of what you might expect. And in general, as analysts, we consider changes of about 1 decibel or less to really be no perceptible change. So you, as somebody experiencing one of these noise events, you wouldn't necessarily notice a difference in what you hear. Okay, so the potential modifications that we considered for noise reduction for these procedures mainly were the altitude shifts. When it was possible, we looked at raising altitudes in order to use a maximum standard descent gradient or descent rate. However, there were a lot of limitations there because of the airspace. The altitudes at Eddy and Archie, which appear in a lot of these procedures, they're limited to a maximum altitude of 6,000 at Eddy and 7,000 at Archie, which definitely limited some of the options that we had in terms of vertically modifying these procedures for less noise. We also looked at path modifications, so shifting the flight paths to the left, right, north, south, east, west, so on and so forth. We considered these mainly with respect to the populated areas. And in some cases, we also looked at the shortest distance paths to the airport or to the next fix or waypoint. So we're going to get into first Group A, the Debay proposed procedure. And this proceduralizes vectors that are being currently issued by air traffic control for aircraft coming from the north. They're headed for runway 28 right, usually via the Arnav Z. And this basically takes the vectors that air traffic controllers are giving and that aren't listed on any approach procedures or formalized in those today, and putting them into something that pilots can request or air traffic controllers can issue to aircraft. As a note, as you can see on the screen, there's the waypoint, the GBAS waypoint following the Debay waypoint. On that leg and the segment following it from the GBAS to waypoint 15, no traffic is really vectored north or northeast of the GBAS to waypoint due to interfering traffic or other traffic in the Oakland area. So the path can't really shift farther to the north, and traffic is limited to where it is right now and further to the west. In general, since this proposed procedure imitates what's being done today, we would not expect any changes in single event noise levels. Another thing to note is that from CPIN or SEPIN inbound, that basically imitates the existing GLS Alpha procedure. So that's already in use today, and there wouldn't be any expected changes on that leg. In terms of potential recommendations for further changes to this procedure that might further reduce noise, we don't have any recommendations for those at this time. The altitudes proposed on this procedure and already being flown are already fairly high. It's 11,000 feet at Debay, coming down to about 5,500 feet at waypoint 15 before starting the turn inbound to the airport. So we don't expect that you could feasibly raise the altitudes anymore. There's limited benefit in doing so anyway. And one potential concern would be, can the aircraft meet the descent gradients? That wasn't included in this analysis, but it is one thing to consider. Altitudes can't really be raised further when you're on the inbound SEPIN on inbound, because at that point, aircraft will need a little bit more of a stable approach and will need to have a standard steady descent rate at that point in time. Additionally, changing those altitudes, that would make it differ from the existing GLS Alpha, and it's unclear if that would be feasible or desirable in terms
Ms. Jensen, do you want us to wait till the end for questions? Or I see a hand raised. I'm just curious. Bill, is this something about what she's talking about now, or do you want to wait till she's done?
No, this is specific to this chart that she's showing.
Yeah, I'm
Okay,
happy to take questions now.
So when I look at the chart, and of course you use this in subsequent charts as well, I was wondering why the noise dissipates quicker over the water than it does over the land.
Could you elaborate on, do you mean why their spacing is wider further out by Debay?
When I'm looking at the, hold on for a second.
You're talking about those.
Yeah, I'm looking at your noise contours. And so, you know, it's in the dark area, it's 90 and 80 and things like that, 85. And then over land, it goes down to 75, where or on land, it goes, the first contour is 85. And the first contour over on the air, on the water is 75, and then it continues to dissipate out. And so to me, it seems, I just didn't understand why. I would think the noise would continue to go out at the same level over water, because there's nothing up there to reflect it.
Altitude.
If I could, this is Gene Reindell. I can respond to that. Really, what the noise levels are doing is getting higher in noise level as the aircraft descends. So they're higher up out over the water, so less noise. But as they come into the airport and lower in altitude, obviously the noise then increases due to it being lower to the ground.
Well, I'm looking at the same area though. I don't want to delay the meeting much, but when I'm looking at the same area where the contours are and they're labeled, they're at the same altitude. When they're traveling along that dark
okay,
line.
so
same.
yeah, so the dark line is the path of the aircraft, and as you move away from that path of the aircraft, the noise will go down laterally. And so it's going down essentially equally in all directions, except for over the bay, because now you have two conflicting. You have the higher altitude as it's making the loop around, and then it's coming in. So you're not going to continue to get those decreased noise levels that you do when you only have the effect of the one path. You have the two paths over the water and traveling laterally.
Well, okay. My just final comment would be, I would think that it would be the same or less on the land side, because there'll be things that will deflect the noise or absorb the noise. So I just thought it may not be correct. That's all. I'm happy to discuss it offline with you.
Yeah, and these also are not our contours. These are the airports. Their consultant developed these contours using the FAA's noise model. But essentially what I said, we could certainly go over this, or you could also ask the airport for more definition of what, how the noise is being modeled. But essentially it is coming down. It's because you have, anyway, the two paths in the same area, because it's circling around, that it affects the noise differently.
Okay.
Go ahead, sir.
Fine.
Okay.
Go ahead.
So the other modification that we considered was shortening the leg lengths between Axmal and Seppin, as well as GBAS 2 and waypoint 15. However, again, that results in a discrepancy in the existing GLS Alpha, which is unclear if that would be feasible or not. The other one, again, is the descent gradient. By shortening those leg lengths, that does mean that you would have to descend faster, and that would potentially exceed the maximum standard gradient as defined by the FAA. Furthermore, that would just shift noise to different communities. It would pull the contour further to the northwest, which would be desirable for some communities, but maybe not for others. So if that was a potential consideration, that would require further analysis and additional modeling. Next, we move to Group B. This one is the bridge visual. So the bridge visual and the bridge visual echo to runway 28R. Up top, we have the bridge visual echo starting from Eddie, and on the bottom is the bridge visual. That one starts from Archie. These approaches proceduralize the existing bridge visual. This procedure isn't published and has to be specifically requested from the controller. The procedure is managed by the airlines, so it's not necessarily known to all aircraft. However, since this does proceduralize and take into account the procedures that currently exist for a single event noise instance, this would mean that we don't expect any changes in the current noise level in accordance with what the airport's consultant found. One potential consideration for this is that since the bridge visual isn't published, by producing these bridge visual GLS procedures, it essentially puts it into the public eye. And the question there is, would that result in more aircraft wanting to fly this bridge visual? The documentation provided in the information from the airport doesn't necessarily allow us to determine the operational change, as there isn't sufficient data to determine the difference between the existing number of operations and the potential number of operations. However, again, on a one-to-one operational basis, we wouldn't expect there to be any change in noise levels for those single events. Again, we don't have any feasible recommendations for this procedure at this time. As I had mentioned before, Archie and Eddie already are at the maximum altitudes allowed for the area, 7,000 for Archie and 6,000 for Eddie, so we can't raise the altitudes further than that. And additionally, the Eddy to Goiby transition that already has the maximum standard descent gradient at that area. In terms of a lateral shift, it would, shifting the paths for both of these would just relocate the noise to different communities. For the eddy transition, the area under which the flight path is, it's already largely at the area of least the less populated area. So shifting it left or right would probably increase the population that would be exposed to noise. As for the Archie, shifting it to this either to the left or the right or so, that would largely just shift it to areas of similar population density. So it wouldn't necessarily provide any benefit, but it also likely wouldn't provide any disbenefit either. Next, we move to Group B, the tiptoe visual replication. These two approaches, they proceduralize the existing tiptoe approach. And again, as with the others, since these two procedures are replications of existing procedures, on a one-to-one basis, no change for noise levels would be expected for either one. We don't see any potential altitude changes for these procedures, again, because of the existing limitations at Archie and Eddy. We did note that there is the potential to possibly shift the waypoint SF 795 for the 28L and 771 for a 28R further out over the water, over the bay, which could improve things for the people in that area. We didn't necessarily look at the potential interactions for other San Francisco traffic or for Oakland or any of the other smaller airports in the area. So that would need to be looked at in more detail. And that would require some discussion with the FAA. We also, was there a question or anything? I see a hand up.
Oh, I don't see a hand up. Oh yeah, I see Doug, Mr. Yako from SFO. Did you have, oh, hand went down. Doug,
I
you're
see
good?
Sam has a hand up, Sam Hindi.
Okay, Mr. Vice Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Sarah, thank you. I see a theme going on. I would like to kind of get clarification from you. When you talk about altitude change, and basically you're referring to the possibility of raising the altitude, is that correct? And you are mentioning those are not feasible due to the limitation on the waypoint, is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
Let's for the sake of argument, let's say that those are feasible. How, if you raise the altitude, would the descent gradient become steeper? Would that affect those communities that are closer to the airport because the plane has to come down at a steeper descent?
Yeah, so in terms of a steeper descent, I guess that largely depends a lot on the aircraft performance. You know, some of them can potentially do a continuous descent. And I believe, and I'm not entirely sure which airlines, or which procedures, but there has been some difficulty with, I'm not sure if it's procedures around the SFO Metroplex area, but in other areas I have heard some potential challenges with aircraft being able to make those the higher descent gradients. So while it is possible that you could say you could raise altitudes and have higher descent gradients, it may or may not be feasible depending on the airlines, which would possibly make the intent a moot point in that if you did raise it, it wouldn't necessarily make any changes.
Also, I think I would just add to that because one of the questions you had, would it make noise closer into the airport different or higher as a result of them coming in at a greater descent profile? And we don't know. We didn't run the noise on this, so you would have to run it just to see. But typically, if you can stay up higher longer, you do get a noise benefit from that. But you bring up a good point that you may not always, and we'd have to actually run the model to see. But unless there was reason to actually increase it, then we would get into discussions with the airport and the FAA to see if that is a possibility.
Understood. Thank you. And the one second question that I do have, when you were talking about the bridge visual, the echo, and the other bridge visual, you said those are non-published. Are those like owned by airlines?
My understanding, oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, that's my question. Thank you.
Okay. Yeah, my understanding is that some airlines, I'm not sure which airline is the one that designed it and has awareness of it, and manages it. I don't necessarily know too much more about that.
Understood. Thank you so much. Sorry for the interruption.
Mr. Ortiz, I see there are a couple other hands up.
Okay, I'm trying to see the presentation. So I see Doug Yako, your hand is back up. Would you like to ask a question?
Chair,
I haven't raised my hand, so sorry if that's showing that way.
Okay. And I see Member Schneider. Ann, do you have a question?
I do, but if you prefer for me to wait till the end of the presentation.
No, we
okay.
already interrupted.
Okay, we're at the end.
Just finish.
Okay, then a couple of questions. It's my understanding some actual test flights occurred on December 2nd and December 16th. Was the noise analyzed from real world experience brought into this?
I think maybe that's a question for our friends from SFO. So let's hold off on that one.
Okay, then a couple of other questions. I think this is going back to the previous comment that if planes are coming in steeper, will it affect incoming areas? And then back to the original point that the staff person made, which is we don't hear a 1 decibel difference. But if all the noise inputs are making a 1 decibel difference, collectively, we will hear a discernible reduction in noise. So every time I hear we don't hear 1 decibel, it kind of bugs me. In fact, to the point where the city of Millbrae will be studying formal counterpoints to these commonly held perceptions. Because if 2 airplanes are both coming in on GBAS and each one makes 1.5 and 1.5, that equals 3. And that is a discernible difference. So I don't like when we silo a particular flight with a particular noise experience, because we don't live in a place with just 1 flight at one time. We live in a very complicated airspace. I'll come back to my modeling versus real world at the end then. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any other?
Bill
Ju-
Whitmer has his
Yeah,
hand.
I've got one real quick.
Okay.
Very similar to what Ms. Snyder just brought up. I want to know, what we actually saw with the United flights, and I was surprised that they were just doing 737s. But the aircraft comes in, it's the density of the flights that are coming in. It's not 1 aircraft, and you're measuring this stuff as just 1 aircraft, but as you know, 2 come in at a time for the most part, and they're all lined up. So the same comment that Ann made, that's real life. And I think that we need to, in this case here, when I'm looking at this chart, it looks like that just not even considering the density, the noise level over East Palo Alto, possibly part of Atherton as well, and Palo too, is because the write-up was that, well, we want to go ahead and recommend that we move forward.
Okay, so here's,
And
here's
if we
I
haven't done
wanted
the
to
proper
make sure,
analysis, it's a problem.
just to make sure I understand. So the studies are saying this is the noise 1 airplane would have, the impact it would have. So you guys are suggesting that now there's 2 planes flying side by side, that impact is multiplied. Is that what we're saying?
Yes, and then there's a flight that's right behind it. There's 2 more right behind it. I mean, you can
Okay,
come
but-
out. Yeah.
But so I want to ask the consultants, or maybe somebody from SFO, what is the distance between those planes, let's say before they make the turn over 795?
Well, if I could first, this is Gene Rangel again. Basically, remember what we're comparing here is the proposed procedure to replace the existing procedure. It's not, we are not comparing how many are going to use that procedure. We're assuming that the same number of airplanes are going to use either procedure, except for in cases where Sarah might have thought maybe it would get used more or less. I don't know if that came to be, but what we're saying here is that SFO is recommending to replace or to provide a new procedure to replace an existing procedure. And so they've the roundtable has asked us to determine what the difference is in between those two procedures. And when we're saying there's essentially no change, less than 1 dB, then we would be recommending to go ahead and support the replacement of the old procedure with the new procedure. That's all we're doing here. It's not talking about number of flights or that sort of thing. It's really what can we support the replacement of a regular procedure with these GBAS procedures, just for clarity.
Okay. Bill, does that help?
Well, I understand what he's saying. I guess I'd like to see the real data, specifically the United data, but as we've brought up, and I think Ann has also brought up before, the density of the flights and the continuous of the flight noise is
Okay,
really shifting the noise.
But for the purposes of what we're doing here today, we're not considering the density of the flights.
Yes,
we're just considering this procedure compared to what's there right now.
Okay. All right.
So and that's just important, because if we're going to move forward with this, we just want to make sure that we're not talking about whether there's more flights or not. That's not coming into our consideration here.
No, but I think that one of the key things is, and they based this, well, I don't know if they based it over the United flight or not, because they did reference that, but I'd like to see the data for now versus what the United flights had done. And I was disappointed that we didn't have the data in here when I went through the whole pack this morning.
Well, and just to recognize that what we are doing is reviewing the information that the airport has provided through modeling. They did indeed do a flight test, and they are analyzing that, or maybe they know at this point, I don't know, but that's the airport that did the noise test, not HMH. So we're just doing our evaluation as required or requested by the roundtable to evaluate.
Right, but my last comment then would be, I don't think that the roundtable should be approving anything or recommending that we move forward until we see the data.
So what the consultant has arrived at is that the difference between what's being proposed and what we have now does not create new noise. That's the only consideration that we're talking about here.
Correct.
Now, are you suggesting that maybe what their analysis is not correct and that we are actually creating more noise with these new procedures?
Well, when I look at the contours, I believe that there is more noise over some specific areas far in the south, which some of those people are not represented on this committee, or B, in the roundtable. East Palo Alto, and parts of Menlo Park, I think the noise is higher. That's all.
But what's being shown here real quick in this chart, we can use this as an example, is that these are the contours for the GBAS as well as the existing procedure, and they're exactly on top of each other. There's no change.
Okay, so Bill, the answer to what you just said is the noise contours are identical on the proposed procedures as to what is being used right now.
Okay.
And I'm just curious if you still have any issues, because that's the key to today's conversation. And the reason we didn't look at the other ones and we haven't analyzed the other ones is because the noise contours were different. So we just went with these to validate what we were being told. And this analysis by HMMH validates what we were being told as far as the noise contours not changing.
Okay. All right. Well, I have a question on the next chart too, which is based on the shading. So they would discuss that when they show the next chart.
Okay. So I'm going to give it back to Ms. Jensen so you could continue.
Okay.
Okay. So we'll talk about Group C, the GLS Romeo for 28R for both Archie and Eddie. These are really similar to the existing GPS Yankee to runway 28R. The main difference here is that the final approach segments are slightly shorter, There's also an increase in elevation between or at Sidby on the eddy transition. And as you can see, the bottom slide has those green contours, which essentially shows improvement on the noise contours on a single event level. Those contours, the outer boundaries are the ones that are the existing, and then when you shift inward on the inside curve, that's the proposed boundary. So the areas that are shaded green, those represent areas where we would expect that noise would decrease somewhat there. For the Archie transition, as you can see, there's not much change in terms of single event noise reductions, just very, very small ones on the order of 1/10 of a decibel at the 2 points noted at Archie and at Dong. However, on the eddy transition, there's a slight decrease at eddy, but then there's up to a potential of a 6 decibel decrease at Sidby and other reductions in that area of between Sidby and Guts. I think there was a question at this point in time.
Okay, does anybody have a question? And again, I'm having trouble seeing hands because I'm watching the presentation. Oh yeah, there's a bunch of hands up. Okay, let me start with Ann, Council or Member Snyder.
Sorry, Chair, that was up before, but I can wait till we're done with all the approaches. Thank you.
Sounds good. I'll get back to you then. Thank you. Anybody have any questions about this specific slide? And with that, then we will move forward. Ms. Jensen, you can continue.
Thanks. Potential modifications for this procedure. Again, no feasible recommendations at this time. The altitude changes were a non-starter because of, again, the restriction at Eddy and Archie. Mm-hmm. Also, the other segments are already at the maximum standard gradient or are in too close to the airport for modification, and they're on the final approach path. Relocation of the flight paths. We would expect that if you shifted the flight path laterally on the eddy transition, it would likely increase the population that would be exposed. At the very least, it would just shift the noise to a different community. And then for the Archie transition, it seems to be over an industrial area, and so shifting the transitions laterally in that area would just continue to affect industrial and not necessarily provide a benefit to the populated areas that would be nearby. The final group that we looked at was Group E, the GLS Alpha for runway 10 L and R. And these are really similar to the RNAV Yankee into 10 L and R. The difference here is that the final approach path on both of these is shifted slightly north. You can kind of see in both of these images that between Norm, GBAS 6 and the airport, the approach path makes a slight jog up northward before shifting back down into the airport. So that's the slight shift that we would expect for this approach. With this shift, the noise would be expected to shift northward as well. There's a potential for a decrease of about up to 3 decibels 4 nautical miles from the approach end on both, as well as 2.5 decibels about 6 miles from the approach end, again on both. You can see from the purple contours and the green contours, the purple areas would experience a bit of increase in noise, while the green areas would experience a reduction in noise. So again, the noise would shift northward as you might expect. One consideration with this is that the existing RNAV Yankee procedures, they're used pretty infrequently to my understanding, kind of on the order of about 1 hour annually, or I guess that's the runway usage, 1 hour annually. So they're not used very frequently. However, when they are used, the airport had informed me that there's a significant number of go-arounds. So as you come in and have to go around, that increases the noise. But by putting these procedures in place, the expectation is that there would be a reduction in the need to go around, I think, because of lower decision altitudes, decision heights, where the airplane can come in and is able to land and to follow the guidance, the navigational guidance closer to the ground and thereby be able to see the runway and land more reliably than with the existing approaches. So by implementing that approach, it is likely to reduce the number of go-arounds and thereby reduce the amount of noise associated with that.
So can I ask a quick question here? Because I do, every time I see that purple, it makes me very nervous. So we are showing some noise shifting in this slide. I understand that this used very infrequently, but still, I guess I was under the impression that the ones we were reviewing today did not have any noise shifting in them. Anybody care to address that?
Yeah, I can start. This is Gene Randell again. We were asked to review this because while it does show a noise increase to the north, as Sarah said, this is still overall intending to make the procedure better. And so you don't have the missed approaches where the aircraft, has to take off again, come back around and land again. So overall, it is a noise reduction because instead of 2 flights to land, you have 1 flight to land. So this is getting at now, while there's an increase of up to 2.5 dB or so, which is perceptible typically, barely noticeable, but perceptible. That change, they won't have to go around and try the landing again. So this is a safety improvement. So they're just looking at the roundtable. My understanding is, and if the airport wants to add into this, please do. But my understanding is they're just asking the roundtable to also support this one, even though there is a slight noise increase on a single event basis. It's going to result in fewer flights.
Okay, and you said this is used very infrequently. Can you talk about what type of conditions would be existing for this procedure to be used?
Yeah, so this is what we typically call opposite flow conditions, where, usually they're departing off that direction. And in this case, they're arriving over the peninsula. Very, very seldom done. Just like when this is arriving the 10 runways, right? Just like when you depart the 19s, also very seldom done. And what I believe, Bert, you were telling us that the use of the arriving on the 10s is on the order of like an hour per year that runway is in use. So it's very infrequent.
Good. Okay, I'll let you guys continue.
Thank you. Good questions.
Okay, so again, we don't have any recommendations at this time. The area where the changes would actually be useful is highlighted in red as it crosses the peninsula. However, at that point in time, that's when the aircraft they're getting to be pretty stable in terms of needing to be straight in and on a stable descent path. So heading changes and abrupt altitude changes aren't necessarily advisable in this area. And furthermore, this represents the shortest distance to the airport. So shifting the path at this point in time to across laterally would just expose more people to the noise that would result.
So on that one, are you implying that at the norm area, it's 300 feet higher?
Yeah, that would
so
be.
You're recommending that with a change in altitude over the Pacific before you can cross.
We aren't recommending it. That was the proposed change in the GLS Alpha over the existing RNAV Yankee.
Okay.
So NMMS is not recommending it. That's how the airport presented it, with the altitude was 300 feet above where it's currently flying, correct?
The procedure that is proposed for this GLS Alpha was proposed with an increase of 300 feet at norm and 100 feet at GBAS over what's currently being flown.
And by the airport in preparing this procedure.
Yes. So you're good, Bill?
Yeah, I just wanted to understand that. I would think that if you're higher, then you may need to be making noise over the city due to air brakes or the flaps or something like that, which cause a lot of noise. So maybe one of the reasons why there's an increase in noise. That's just a comment.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, thank
Ms.
you.
Yerson? Yeah, Jensen.
Jensen,
Sorry.
no worries. All right, so just to sum things up, we agree with the airport's conclusions regarding the single event noise changes as a result of these innovative approach procedures, and that we suggest the roundtable support the implementation of the procedures that we discussed here, for the reason that we expect that there would be no single event noise changes. Essentially swapping out one procedure for another would not necessarily increase the noise on that one-on-one basis. We did point out a couple modifications that could be implemented on the tiptoe visual replacement. However, the recommendation that we think the roundtable could support this group, it doesn't depend on the implementation of those modifications. We think that those would be able to improve the noise problem, the noise reduction of those, but as it is, the one-on-one swap would be fine from our point of view.
Perfect, thank you. Okay, so I'm going to open it up to members again for any questions. I'm sorry, Ms. Jensen, you're done with your presentation?
Yes,
Okay.
we're done.
So I'm going to open it up to members for any questions before we open it up to the public.
And Chair Ortiz, I do want to point out that SFO will also be presenting on this item. So I don't know if they have anything to clarify that members may still.
And actually, you know what, you just reminded me, because Mr. Hanna does have to leave early. So why don't we just go ahead and bring in SFO to comment, and then we can open it up to questions. So Bert, are you guys ready for me?
Yes, sir.
Or Mr. Hanna himself?
We're ready to go if that's acceptable to
yes, let's
to the
please, because I know that you have to leave early, so I would hate to miss out on your presentation.
It's very rude of me, and I really appreciate the opportunity as always to present here. And I'm going to start off things, and then I'm going to hand a part of our presentation over to Christian to talk about the portable noise measurement report. But the topics that we wanted to speak about separately from the outstanding job that I think HMMH did, reviewing the community flight procedure packages. Thank you, Jean and Sarah. So we wanted just to quickly talk about the current GBAS project timeline, an update that was made by the project team here to the GLS Romeo procedure and the community flight procedure package that is now up online on the noise.flysfo.com website. We did want to spend just a few minutes answering a question that we're getting both here at the technical working group and in our email portal about visual approach utilization and how that may or may not be altered by creating GLS versions of visual approaches today. So we've got just a few minutes we want to talk about on that. The fourth thing we want to cover, and I'm going to go through that part very quickly, is the United Airlines evaluation flights. And the reason why I'm going to go quickly is because we have more data to share than what we have in this presentation or than what's in the portable noise measurement report. So if there's a takeaway that folks would like to see more data similar to what we're sharing here today, we can certainly do that after today's TWG. And then I'll turn things over to Christian. So the next slide we have here, a familiar looking diagram showing our project timeline here for the GBAS at San Francisco. The main two things that I'd like to point out on this slide is that the GBAS is not yet operational at SFO. In November, we had briefed out that we were very hopeful that we would be finishing up with our commissioning of the GBAS. We ran into a small complication when we were finishing up our flight inspection relative to one element of the GBAS, which has to do with how the signal is actually broadcast to the aircraft. And we have to modify that particular aspect on the airport. And that modification is being made in the month of February. And we expect to have the GBAS turn on and be operational for the 4 identical overlay GLS procedures, which are already published, but they're NOTAM'd out of service, somewhere around the middle of March of this year. So just to repeat, the GBAS is not on at the moment. There are no aircraft flying GLS approaches, but we do expect that the date that everything will turn on and the first aircraft can try GLS overlay approaches will be the middle of March. And if, for those of you that are tracking the 5G situation, there are no 5G interference issues with GLS approaches. So that'll be the first opportunity we're looking at here at SFO. The second aspect we want to point out for the timeline is that we are hearing and very hopeful to get the feedback from the technical working group and the roundtable that there may be some of our Group 1 innovative approach procedures that we can take forward as an airport and request for the FAA to begin development on. We're tracking that hopefully by the end of this quarter, which would be phenomenal if we can get there. And that would trigger the dark blue band that you see here on this slide, which would be the formal FAA development of the procedure, again, including the FAA's required NEPA analysis, which is separate and independent from anything that we've been reviewing so far with yourselves and members of the public. At that point, once we get through the Group 1 request, that's when our project team would like to take upcoming technical working group meetings to spend more time going through Group 2A procedures, which we don't have a lot on here today, but I know we've spent some time talking about in the past, but please look forward to more on that coming up if the schedules permit. Slide 4, just a quick reminder, again, we made an update to the GLS Romeo Group 1 innovative GLS procedure. And this change was based on recommendations from not only members here at the technical working group, but members of the public. And the request came about because when we first attempted to replicate the RMP Yankee approach, which is an existing RMP approach to 28 right that takes aircraft over the water, a little bit before they then curve back into runway 28 right. Our attempt to replicate that resulted in 2 minimum altitudes needing to get decreased by about 100 feet. And those altitudes were coming into Dong and Joseph that you can see here kind of on the right-hand side of the screen. We got feedback that that everyone would really like us to find a way to restore those altitudes to match the existing RMP Yankee. And it took us a while. And by us, I mean all of the members of the Flight Procedure Subcommittee working together. And we found a solution that involved just incredibly minor, tiny shifts of the waypoints to get our altitudes back up to 1,300 feet and 1,800 feet respectively. So now our revision 2 of the GLS Romeo Community Flight Procedure Package, which is up on the website, reflects essentially no noise changes when you start to get closer into the runway, and only noise benefits potentially coming from eddy side-by and into guts. So we encourage everybody to take a moment to take a look at those changes when they have a chance. The next section of our update covers what I mentioned before about visual kind of approach operations into San Francisco. And this is not exactly a simple topic. And I respect that I'm going a little bit quickly, but I'm going to do my best. And so what I wanted to spend just a few moments here is to say that we, as a project team, have gotten a lot of questions from the public about visual approach procedures at San Francisco International Airport. And I think, you know, the term, it sounds like there's one term, like to call things a visual approach, but it actually, there are a number of different kinds of approach procedures that are used under visual conditions at the airport. And there are some kinds of visual approaches that are absolutely not used or used as sparingly as possible. So what we wanted to do was present kind of our understanding as a project team about which visual approaches are being used and how converting them into GLS procedures may or may not affect their utilization in the future. And then we also wanted to present some information from our Flight Procedure Subcommittee about how the FAA and our air traffic stakeholders also view kind of the priorities for visual approach procedures. So on page 6, it's a busy graphic. I respect that. But what we wanted to lay out here is that when you experience visual conditions at SFO, clear skies, you know, no fog, nothing of that nature, the airport has the opportunity and air traffic has the opportunity to clear aircraft under a visual approach clearance. So if this were a very small airport and there was nothing else out there, let's say we were, I'll use a great example. Let's pretend we're in Hawaii and you were under visual meteorological conditions. You might actually have as many as like 5 different opportunities for things that could be used under those visual approaches. So there's the first one, Roman numeral 1, that we refer to as like a pure visual approach. That's an approach where there's no formal route prescribed. Anybody can do it under visual conditions if the tower clears you to it. That's kind of like the beginning aviation term about a visual approach procedure. It's just you're cleared visual, come on in, find your own way to get to the airport. The second option, specific to San Francisco, which is Roman numeral number 2, are charted visual approach procedures. And I think many of you on the TWG probably have exposure to these CVFPs. That's the tiptoe, which is a charted visual flight procedure, and the quiet bridge. And so this is a visual route that air traffic and the airlines can all agree is probably the safest and most efficient path to take for an aircraft under visual conditions. And it happens so frequently that the FAA converts it into a published chart and then can clear aircraft to it by name. So when you're experiencing visual conditions in number 2, one of the things that can be done is the controller could clear a flight crew to the tiptoe visual or the quiet bridge visual as an example. And then there is now a prescribed route along with that charted visual flight procedure where the aircraft is anticipated to go. The third opportunity, as Sarah spoke about a little bit, is what's called an RNAV visual flight procedure, or quite specifically to San Francisco, an FMS visual approach procedure. So FMS visual approaches were kind of like the early versions, and RNAV visual is the modern term, just to make a distinction there. There is an RNAV visual flight procedure today to runway 1 right, not used very frequently, but there is one in existence. The distinction between what you see in Roman numeral number 2 and number 3, number 2 procedures are published by the FAA and anybody can see them. Number 3 procedures are typically maintained by an airline and only distributed amongst other airlines with support from the FAA. So this kind of happens behind the scenes, and they're not going to be published and out there for the public to see. So there's 2 examples for SFO. One of them is this RVFP to 1 right, and the other one is the FMS bridge visual to 28 right. And that's one of the procedures that we're looking at converting into a GLS to enable other aircraft to have an opportunity to use it, other than the handful of airlines that kind of use it today. Those procedures, again, they're a prescribed route. And what gets very specific about number 3 is those are really kind of RNAV-ish procedures, in that there are specific waypoints that are defined, and the aircraft is going to navigate as if it was an RNAV approach between those points. The pilots still have responsibilities because it's a visual approach clearance that they have to see and avoid other aircraft. They have to see and avoid obstacles in terrain. But there is a prescribed track. And in many cases, the airline that flies an RVFP, they're going to fly it like it's an RNAV approach with that kind of precision on the path. The fourth option is that an instrument approach can be offered, even though it's visual conditions. The pilot can either request it, or ATC can issue an approach to the ILS, which is very common, or an RNAV or a GLS approach in the future. The fifth one, which I'm not going to talk about in a lot of detail today, is typically something that would be done under visual conditions, which is a circling approach or a sidestep approach. But the idea there is you're making an approach to one runway and then you break off and maneuver to a different one, either something subtle like you're making an approach to 28 left and then you switch to 28 right, or something drastic like you're making an approach to 28 left and then you break off and you circle to 1 right. For San Francisco, we're going to show another slide here in a second to show what we've learned from the Flight Procedure Subcommittee relative to those 5 kind of options that are available. So on slide 7, what we learned, and there's a lot here, and I'm not going to go through kind of everything in super huge detail, but there's a couple key points that we'd like to address, which is that San Francisco is not your typical airport. It's not even your typical major airport. The fact that the 2 runways are very, very closely spaced together means that even in visual operating conditions, there's a lot of additional safety and risk mitigating steps that both air traffic have elected to take here, and the FAA have encouraged, and airlines have taken upon themselves to avoid kind of landing on the wrong runway, or in a historical case, accidentally almost landing on a taxiway. And so what has happened, the FAA has published a lot of information trying to discourage pilots from flying that first type of approach. Oh, I'm sorry, was there audio? Oh, my bad. The FAA has published SAFOs trying to discourage pilots from just flying purely visual approaches. So that's like your type 1 approach, where there isn't a route, you're just kind of navigating in, especially at busy airports like San Francisco. The airlines have also taken these steps as well. So it's very, very unlikely that an aircraft flies kind of a free form approach coming into SFO. They're flying some kind of prescribed route to get to the runways. And some of those, the SAFOs actually were generated because of incidents that have happened here at San Francisco in the past. Furthermore, the SAFO actually encourages airlines even under visual conditions, to fly a published approach. So this is a situation where air traffic may have cleared the aircraft to a visual approach. They've got the airport in sight, they've got air traffic in sight, but the FAA is still encouraging pilots to use a published approach procedure to make that approach and landing into the runways. It just maximizes safety. We also learned from our subcommittee participants that many international air carriers here at SFO, they just request an instrument approach by default. Overseas operations don't typically rely heavily on visual approach operations. And you can imagine that an air crew that's come in after a multi-hour flight would probably like some assistance from the aircraft and its autopilot to get them a little bit closer to the runway. And so it's very typical for most of the international air carriers coming in to fly, either an RNAV or an ILS. We also learned that domestically, it's a bit of a mix between air carrier usage of the Type 3 and Type 4, which is like the FMS bridge visual and a published approach. So we find that many of the GBAS capable aircraft today, and the air carriers are here today, they're already flying either the FMS bridge visual or an RNAV or ILS approach. Like that's what they're doing today. And then when the GBAS turns on tomorrow, they're going to potentially fly the GLS version of those approaches. For the non-GLS capable aircraft, they're either flying the charted visual approach that's been encoded as if it was an RNAV approach. So they're flying it kind of like they're on a railroad track, or they're flying one of the other published approaches today. So when we put all that together and we go back to that graphic that you see here, what we find is that the Type 1, like the visual approaches, are extremely uncommon here at San Francisco. And this is due to, again, mitigating risks associated with wrong surface landing and just needing a very precise and safe and orderly method for aircraft to make their ways to the runways. We also very rarely see circling or sidestep approaches. So what we expect here at SFO is 3 different kinds of approaches to be flown under visual conditions: the charted visual approaches, the FMS visual approach, which is the bridge visual, or a published instrument approach. And the key here that you see down below is that the method by which the air carriers are flying these visual approaches is almost always RNAV. And they're using, so they've got waypoints to find, even for a charted visual approach, they've got a waypoint to find, and they are letting the flight director kind of guide them point to point all the way down until they get to the runway. So what that means for us on this slide is that as we look to introduce GLS procedures that either replicate a visual approach procedure, or in some cases like the FMS bridge visual, we're taking something that only a few air carriers have and we're creating a public version of it that even international air carriers could have. We're giving more and more opportunities for additional air carriers to use what has been considered to be a noise beneficial procedure here at the airport. They're beneficial because they have slightly higher altitudes than the other approaches, and some of them actually take the aircraft slightly over water, like the FMS bridge visual is actually a little bit of more of an over water procedure. So I know I'm racing through this, but our point about trying to share this information with you here today is just a quick summary that, first and foremost, the FAA is really discouraging air carriers from flying visual approaches, purely visual approaches into SFO. And they're encouraging everybody, and the airlines have adopted this policy as well for decades, to fly a public approach, an RNAV, an ILS, or a GLS when it's available, to maximize safety and minimize wrong surface landing incidents. We also would like folks to know that some of the questions about visual approaches have been related to dispersion opportunities. And what we've learned from working with our subcommittee and exploring this issue is that the dispersion that is experienced by residents today is more directly related to vectors being issued by the TRACON rather than an aircraft purely flying a visual approach. It's about 95-5 or 98-2 if you're talking about percentages. Finally, the last thing I want to point out is that introducing GLS approaches is not going to change the rate or opportunity or requirement for ATC vectoring. So that dispersion that's happening today when we introduce GLS versions of visual approaches, it's not going away. We're just giving more and more aircraft that opportunity to come in kind of higher and a little more noise effectively. The last thing I'm going to cover before I hand things over to Christian to talk about the noise measurement report is the United Airlines flight evaluations. As mentioned earlier by one of the TWG members, there were 2 successful noise evaluations that were conducted using the 737 MAX 8 aircraft. The first occurred on the 2nd of December in the evening, and the second one occurred on the 16th of December in the morning. In total, that aircraft and air traffic control were able to execute 10 approaches, 8 of which were flown over the portable noise monitors. And before I forget, We are extremely grateful as a project team, both to United Airlines for making their aircraft, a new aircraft that came out of the factory, 2 of them technically, and they rerouted them to San Francisco specifically to help in this noise evaluation, which is just a tremendous opportunity that United's provided us with to try to find more noise, more accuracy in our noise measurements, and hopefully find better noise procedures. But we're also very grateful to the FAA, because this was a lot of additional coordination that different levels of air traffic control had to engage in to make sure this was safe and successful. So really appreciate all the efforts that were undertaken to get us this far. On this slide, we have a list of the innovative GLS procedures that we were hoping to target with United. Unfortunately, it takes a little bit of time to fly the aircraft down to San Francisco and execute the approach and go back around and do it kind of again and again. And so we didn't get every approach in our first pass. So we in fact, the ones that we were hoping for, but we didn't get a chance to do, were the Tango Tango, or the version of the tiptoe. And we had one goal to try to get to 10 left, and we almost had a chance to get it, but it slipped away from us for safety reasons. So we didn't execute that, but we did get the down the bay procedure, the GLS Romeo, and some of the GLS Alpha procedures, specifically from Eddie, evaluated with the United airplane. The next couple of slides are just an example of the data that we have and that we can share with the TWG if there's an interest. This slide shows the lateral track of one of the RNAV GPS approaches. So this is where United flew the existing approach to help us establish some accuracy of our noise measurements. And then we have information taken from the cockpit about the altitudes that they flew, the speeds they flew, their speed brake configuration, their flap setting, their landing gear. Great, useful information to help us with ensuring that our noise calculations are as beneficial and accurate as possible. Here's that same aircraft flying the GLS Alpha, and one of the biggest things you'll notice is no speed brakes. Same aircraft, virtually the same weight, slightly higher altitude, very clean. And Christian will be talking about a little bit more about that here in his portable noise measurement, but just a synthesis of what we're seeing from the aircraft data. When the aircraft flew this MAX 8, brand new, out of the factory, relatively light, when it flew the existing approaches, every time or almost every time it needed to deploy speed brakes between Eddie and side by, or side by Seepin and He-Man. Which means that, I think what you're experiencing today in these areas, it happened as well with the MAX 8 when it went out there. When it flew the published approach, follow the flight director, the only way to get the speeds down required some kind of speed brake or early flap deployment. When the aircraft flew the innovative GLS procedures, no speed brake deployment required, and lower flap settings or no flap setting deployment until a bit later in the approach. So we're very excited by, again, this is a very small sample. This is not like a huge study, it's just a first kind of sample, but we're very excited that these approach designs appear to have the intended effects of reducing energy management requirements. Before I hand things to Christian, just a quick reminder, for what we're considering today. So the white and the green, again, the United aircraft did have a chance to look at the down the bay and the Romeo procedures, and as you heard from HMMH, I believe their conclusions were that many of our findings are similar to their understandings, and that these procedures either have potentially no change or potentially some benefits or things of that nature. So we'd really like to make sure folks, when you're thinking about the next round of innovative procedures for your for confirmation to move forward to the full roundtable, or for us to take forward, if you need to focus on a smaller set, the green and the white would be a great opportunity. Our next steps is to publish the noise measurement report, which is heading up for the website here shortly, and that's it for me. So I'm going to stop sharing and turn things over to Christian, who's now going to take us through the portable noise measurement report.
Thank you very much, Mr. Hunt. I appreciate your presentation.
Thank you, Paul. Thank you, Mr. Ortiz. Let's see, you should be seeing my presentation on the screen.
Yep.
Great. In the next 8 slides or so, I'll show some of the highlights and a summary of the GBAS noise measurement report. The overall objective was to capture aircraft noise at the 6 monitoring sites that were deployed by the airport. But specifically for GBAS, we wanted to capture SFO runway 28 left and right non-GLS approaches, and more specifically to capture the United Airlines test flight of the Group 1 innovative approach test flights. Those test flights, as Paul mentioned, happen in four passes over the microphones on December 2nd, and 4 more passes in December 16th. So we took those 2 weeks, those 15 days of data, and called that the monitoring period. On the top right-hand side, you see the locations for the 6 microphones, and we've relabeled them since you last saw them at previous meetings. We went in alphabetical order from south to north. That's the flight path of aircraft. And the little black lines that you see there are gates that we created over each monitoring site. They're about 4 miles wide. And that was to capture gate penetration and altitude analysis, which I'll get to later. On the bottom right is the site names and elevations for each of the sites. And you can see that there are 2 sites in Los Altos, 3 in Palo Alto, and 1 in Menlo Park. Some of the limitations that we face were the small sample size, as Paul mentioned, and that the measurement versus model variations. Also, when we compare measurements to the model, we always expect a little bit of variations, and that's because the model has many atmospheric settings that may be different than the real life measurement scenarios. So please see this report as the first step on our data collection efforts. More testing in the future will help us arrive at more concrete conclusions. For the most part, the results of this report show GLS promise in respect to noise reduction. The noise monitors captured all aircraft community noise equivalent levels shown on the left-hand side. The sites A, B, and C were grouped geographically, essentially close together, and you can see that the noise levels were a little lower compared to site D, E, and F that were further closer to the airport, further down the flight path, and aircraft were lower. The microphones also captured non-aircraft noise levels called community noise levels, and the chart on the right shows the community CNEL levels. One item to point out is at site F, the pink line that you see there on the 9th. We listened to the noise events that were really loud at that site, and those were due to lawn mowing equipment. This table here shows the daily average noise events for each one of the monitoring sites. So during the monitoring period, there were 5,001 arrivals to SFO runway 28 left and right. Out of those, 2,700 approximately flew over the peninsula on the Surfer or from the south, and the Bodega from the northwest. I'm not going to go over each one of these rows, but wanted to highlight the bottom row here. That's the daily average summary. And these columns represent the number of noise events at each site, the SEL, sound exposure level in dB, the Lmax, and then community ambient for each site. And just wanted to highlight that the average Lmax, for example, for site A was 55, and for the rest of the sites remained around 50, a little bit lower than 60. And as a reference, speaking voice between 2 people standing about 3 feet away is between 60 and 65 Lmax. The next couple of tables show, the top one shows.
Are we going to get these charts because they were not included in the pack?
Yes, all these, this report will be posted in the next couple of days, and it'll have all this information. All these
posted where, Christian? I'm sorry.
On the airport website.
Okay, thank you.
The top table shows the noise levels from the most frequent SFO aircraft arrivals. So for example, for site A, the Embraer 175 had 266 arrivals or noise events at that microphone. And there you see the SEL, average Lmax, and duration for that aircraft. The next most frequent aircraft was the Airbus A320, and then the Boeing 737-800. And this kind of remained the trend for the remaining sites. Some of the aircraft changed order, and this RJ here inserted itself into being the 3rd most frequent aircraft over site B. Then the next table shows the loudest SFO aircraft arrivals at each monitoring site. For the most part, the 747 was the loudest aircraft over each one of the sites. And just to note here that at site D, the loudest noise event was part aircraft noise event and part community noise event. Now this table compares the Boeing 737 MAX 8 approaches, the non-GLS versus the test GLS approaches made by United Aircraft. During the monitoring period, there were 77 MAX 8 approaches into SFO. 9 of them were on the surfer. And out of those 9, only 5 of them we were able to compare exactly to GLS approaches. The other 4 were kind of weaving in and out of the procedure. So we wanted to compare apples to apples, essentially. So we took the best 5 that we could compare. And those noise levels for the non-GLS approaches that occurred during the monitoring period are on the top row. Then we compared those to the 4 passes made by United Airlines of the RNAV approaches. And there you can see them on the second line. And then highlighted here is essentially an outdated row, because very recently we found out that the last pass, the 4th pass on December 16th, wasn't deemed that it was a GLS approach. So we're going to take that out of this row. There will be 3 arrivals, and I'll update these numbers on the report that will be posted. For the most part, the non-GLS approaches were quieter in the SCL metric and LMAX metric than the test GLS approaches. The non-GLS approaches flew at higher altitudes over sites A, B, and C, but at lower altitudes at sites D, E, and F compared to the GLS approaches. And we think that's because the non-GLS approaches were vectored into the area. This is an itemized list of all the
Can I
UAL.
ask a question on that chart, please?
Yeah, go ahead, Bill. Mr.
Yeah,
Whitmer.
so when you down at the bottom, you say, well, this is what we modeled. So when I'm looking at, say, E and F, okay, so all the numbers above it are in the 70s essentially, and you modeled them at 68 and 69, and then you lowered the lower number to 56, and it doesn't look like it makes much sense.
Right. So at sites A, B, and C, the modeling and the measurements matched fairly well. And then as it got closer at D, E, and F, there are some discrepancies. So we have to dive a little deeper at seeing the reasons of these discrepancies, and then we'll be able to provide more information.
Well, is there going to be any corrective action with regards to the potential flight paths to make sure that they're not in the 75 range, but they're down closer to what you're modeling?
Well, we'll hopefully have more test flights in the future where we could collect more real life data. And there may be some adjustments possible to the model. The model was set at default atmospheric settings. That's the temperature, humidity, and pressure. Yeah. That varied from the December days that were tested. So we'll take a look at the model and see if we can make some adjustments.
Okay, because as everybody knows, I mean, we hear a lot from the people south, specifically some of the people that aren't even part of this roundtable that are complaining very loudly with regards to the noise increase that they're projecting, and this kind of says, well, you know, for me, it says, well, we're modeling a lower number, but our experience says it's going to be higher, but we're going to give you the lower number when we draw these contours. So that's it. Sorry.
Through the chair.
Yes, please go ahead.
Are we going to quit right at 1:30?
I'm hoping so.
Okay.
I really.
I'll try to
so-
make this quick. Number one, lots of new data. Thank you. I'll point out that one of SFO's criticisms of the ground-based noise spectral analysis model was only 1 or 2 airplane types were used. And I could use the same criticism against the work that's currently been done. I understand you want to do more studies, but if SFO is going to criticize the spectral noise study because of lack of airplane types, the same argument can be used here. The other one, golly, I'd love to dive into more of this. Anytime the airport, like you mentioned, airport noise event plus community noise event. So you're changing the data or you're looking at that particular event differently. How so? What does that really mean? I don't think we have time right now to do that. My problem, again, goes back to FAA's 365-day average. The experience of this at night is very different than the experience of this at day. And as soon as we average everything out, we are losing what is really happening to people and animals. Because, and then on top of that, most recently, the FAA study, the neighborhood noise study, found that annoyance levels are approaching, and I don't have the study in front of me, but it's over 50% at 55 decibels. So again, when we look at each one of these projects in its own little silo, you're asking we, the elected officials, to approve this eventually based on looking at one particular aspect of the issue. And we can't simplify the world like that. The world is not simple like that. And we, the elected officials, are smart enough to look at diverse situations, diverse issues, and make a decision on this. To me, I understand GBAS is a safety issue. It'll allow flights to arrive safer, especially those unfamiliar with SFO or the Bay Area. As someone who lives in Millbrae, that's good. Safety, always good. But what this means is you can turn around more planes. And as we approach back to 71 million passengers from the 57 million pre-COVID, that means more planes, more noise incidents that'll get averaged out by the FAA, which is wrong, and ultimately makes life unbearable. I'm sorry, I'm oversimplifying this, but I'm not ready to go forward on this. I wouldn't be ready if it came to the SFO roundtable. I would love to dive into these numbers a little bit. And I really have a problem with how we use ambient noise and then use it to say, well, at night, that's why they can be this loud. So that's kind of my comments on all of this. Ultimately, GBAS will allow more planes in and out of San Francisco. Will it allow more planes to leave before the magic 10 o'clock night period? Possibly. But as the airport always points out to me, the airlines themselves can choose when they want to fly. So if you want us to approve GBAS, I want some assurances that these flights are going to be happening in day or evening and not night.
Okay, you guys, let me just real quick, because we do have somebody on waiting to do the presentation on night hush, so I do want to move this along. Here's the scoop. We have 4 group procedures that the airport presented. We had our consultant review them to make sure that we agreed with their modeling. And so they've arrived and they've looked at them and said, yes, they agree with the modeling. And then we had one, small number of test flights that have gone over that I guess in some cases bear out the modeling, but in others it doesn't. But so we are faced right now, we need to recommend these 4 groups to the roundtable in full. And I'm running out of time, so I hate to do this, but I do want to limit our conversation to that. So I would want somebody to propose that we recommend this to the roundtable, or if not, let's have a conversation about it, but we have really not a lot of time. So with that, anybody have any thoughts on that?
Chair Ortiz, I do see Ms. Wentworth with her virtual hand raised.
Okay, Kathleen, please go ahead. And again,
I'll
I'm
make it
really
quick.
short on time.
I have some concerns about the down the bay approach. And first of all, I don't see on the San Francisco website, although it's easy to overlook, I'm sure, the latitude and longitude, the locations of Debay and the GBAS2 waypoints. I think we need to be very careful not to wave a magic wand over this arrival. It has a great deal of benefit to it, without a doubt, but it also has the potential for increasing noise in the over San Francisco residents.
So
And
compared to the current arrival procedure, do you have concerns that this is changing it substantially?
I have concerns. We don't know what it's doing, Mr. Chair. I think what we need to do is get some numbers on the number of flights currently using the informal vectoring down the bay procedure. There is no published procedure for that. So we need to get some numbers on how many of those are doing it. And more importantly, perhaps we need to see some tracks of actual airplane vectors to see where they're going now and how they line up with the proposed procedure, and to see if different parts of San Francisco, different communities, different people are being impacted. I think this is very different than comparing it to an existing procedure, because you're comparing it to a current informal vector, which varies from the controller to controller, wind conditions, and all sorts of other reasons how it varies. So I think we need to take a very close look at this to see. Other comments I will try to take up maybe with San Francisco, Paul, or someone later in the interest of time. But
Right.
I do have some. I think the down the bay needs some closer scrutiny.
Thank you and welcome back. Okay. Any other comments right now?
Yes,
Gene, you have
Mr.
a
Chair.
comment? But let me just, Gene, so you had your hand raised?
I did not have my hand raised, but
Okay,
one
sorry.
point I
Go
wanted
ahead.
to. Yeah, go ahead.
Sam, go ahead.
Thank you. So question on the noise measurement sites that have been deployed A through F. Are these the only sites that took measurements during the United Airlines test flights? I mean, are there other sites also?
The other sites that are operated by the airport, we're still collecting data, but these 6 sites were specific to this report and measuring the UAL test flights.
Okay, well, in general, I think that's a lot of data to digest in a few minutes. And I really would love to see not just the data for A through F, but also throughout the system. So we could find the impact on the all the communities that are going to be impacted by this, not just A through F. Further, I think even the test and the results that we have heard today, it clearly saying that the actual real life testing is a little bit varies from the noise modeling that had come from SFO, and even SFO is saying, oh, we need to adjust based on the real life testing. So I think for me, at least, it is premature to recommend anything until we see the data of the actual testing.
So Vice Chair Hindi, would you like to then make a motion to table this and for a future meeting until we get some more questions answered?
Absolutely. I would move to table making a decision on recommendation to the entire roundtable until we get the data. We need to find out, like, for example, the report we just saw today, that's great. But again, we cannot digest it. I cannot digest it in a few minutes. And I need to have more comprehensive data so we could have everybody's questions answered.
Very
I'd like
good.
to
So
second that.
we have a
Second.
motion from Vice Chair Hindi to table the issue, seconded by Member Widmer. So if we could have a roll call.
Member Hindi,
Yes.
Member Schneider,
Yes.
Member O'Connell,
Yes.
Member Whitmere,
Yes.
and Chair Ortiz.
Yes.
Motion
And so-
to table the decision.
With that, and it is a complex issue. It does require a lot of time, and I'm sorry to rush you guys. I
Through the
feel
chair,
terrible.
I'm
Yes.
sorry, Charities, we still do have to take public comment on this.
Oh,
item.
I am so sorry. I'm again sorry. Let's open it up for public comment.
I do see 3 hands raised, so I'm going to call on Mr. Scholl first.
Okay, please, I'm gonna beg you guys to please keep it short because I'm trying to squeeze somebody else in there after us, and so please keep it short.
And I'm going to keep time on my phone. For the sake of time, I accidentally lost my timer, but for the sake of time, to keep the meeting going, Mr. Scholl.
believe the roundtable should also defer making GBAS recommendations related to Surfer and Eddy, particularly because they are so far out of roundtable territory. Also, given how HMMH assertions in this document may be used, the verbal disclaimers they made today should be included in the document. Surfer 3 and Eddy are post-select community designs that significantly increase noise over Surfer 2. Also, the problems are tightly coupled with whether GBAS will increase or decrease noise over us. Today, planes on Surfer 3 arrive at Eddy too high and too fast, in other words, over energy. Within days of Surfer 3's introductions, residents noted an explosion of air brakes just after Eddy, which when reported to the roundtable were dismissed. We followed up with FOIA requests for minutes from the Surfer 3 design meetings. They showed the designers knew it was over energy. Again, the roundtable didn't react. Finally, the SFO GBAS team did listen. In addition to modeling the GBAS arrivals, they also modeled Surfer 3 as is and indeed found significant over energy spikes in Eddy. In December, United flew flight tests on Surfer. The as-is flights were so over energy coming off Surfer 3, they required speed brakes near side-by in Palo Alto, excess flap settings, and even the last resort tool for deceleration, early deployment of landing gear to slow down. This is in today's packet, page 45. We were asking if this well-documented over energy problem coming off Surfer 3, the unnecessary use of speed brakes, excess flaps, and early deployment of landing gear be recognized and corrected for all arrivals, and not just excused by planes that someday all planes will use GBAS, and this somehow will fix the problem. We also at the roundtable recognize that there are separate problems that are primarily outside its territory. The roundtable qualify the scope of any approvals of GBAS it chooses to make to reflect its boundaries. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Scholl. I will now call on Jennifer Landesman. Ms. Landesman?
Hi, thank you. There's a great concern about how this is all represented currently by the airport and the SFO roundtable, and the FAA has not been visible. And that really creates a problem for the identicals or overlays that supposedly the roundtable has already vetted and has no problem with. I find it hard to reconcile the comments from committee members today about how noise measurements are done and what the experience on the ground is. I don't even think it's legal to screen procedures the way you're doing it. From prior FAA documentation, some of these comments, and I'll send them to you, stand out. One, there is no scientific correlation between single event noise metrics and how people react. Another comment, to measure noise without the ability to correlate noise with effects on people that DNL provides could be considered at odds with even a very broad definition of effects under national environmental policy, as interpreted by CEQ, Council of Environmental Quality, CEQ. And another thing, a determination of a noise reduction divorced from the HERA would be a marked departure from noise impact determinations and would continue. And so really, I'm kind of surprised that the FAA is sitting in the meeting, and so is the Office of Members of Congress. And the way that noise is being evaluated is completely inconsistent and, per the FAA's own language, divorced from their legal obligations. So I really think that you need to go back to look at the so-called identicals, Pirate, Surfer, and these overlays that fortunately have been delayed and are not going to be published until March, and provide a baseline and see what corrections can be made based on all of this progress in terms of the work that is going technically to see
Ms.
how to
Landesman, your 2 minutes are up.
Yeah, so I'm sorry, but I do need to move on.
I will now
let's-
call on Ms. Rebecca Ward, which is the last hand I do see raised from the public. Ms. Ward?
Thank you, Rebecca Ward, Palo Alto. The documents HMMH and the airport provided repeatedly reference Eddy and Side-by. These waypoints are in Santa Clara County. The roundtable just voted not to expand membership to communities outside San Mateo and San Francisco counties. It cannot now make decisions that impact these communities. You should instead direct the airport to also gain approval from the communities under the Eddy to Side-by route. Second, the limited United data clearly show inherent problems with Surfer, over energy planes, speed brakes, excessive noise between Eddy and Side-by. Surfer clearly needs to be fixed before you overlay procedures. The analogy would be building a house on a crumbling foundation. Please note, the FAA has never acknowledged these issues existed, even though numerous Palo Alto residents complained. Which brings me to my last point. Near Side-by, it is not uncommon for arrival flights to fly below SFO's Class B airspace and to be above the 200 knot speed limit when doing so. The FAA redesigned the Class B airspace in 2018, in part to fix a similar containment issue off the Capitola coastline to improve safety and to avoid the potential for a mid-air collision. The FAA needs to analyze the containment problem over Palo Alto near Side-by before implementation of overlay or new procedures. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so thank you. With that, we've all agreed to table this to a future meeting, and so we will move on. Mr. Yekel, I don't know if you would prefer to have your presentation for the next meeting, or do you have information that you want to share with us today?
Chair, if you can accommodate 5 more minutes, I'll keep it real short.
5 minutes.
Okay.
You're on.
This is basically an ask for the roundtable to make a vote in their regular meeting on a course of action regarding this night hush procedure that we've talked about real quick. And I'm going to present a single slide that essentially summarizes what we see as the options that are available to the roundtable to vote on as it pertains to this procedure. And Chair Ortiz, if you could confirm that you can see my...
I can.
All right. So option number 1 is the current proposal, which is essentially a 1 to 5 a.m. window of time, flying over the GOBS waypoint. The FAA, if they received approval from the roundtable, could implement it within 3 months of your approval. And then in terms of when it could be operated, this is a procedure that could be operated even after SFO gets back to 100% of pre-pandemic flight levels. And we're at about 75% right now for reference. Option number 2 came out of Jackie Spears' office. This is a proposal for an expanded window of time, an additional 30 minutes at the front, an additional 45 at the rear, still flying over GOBS. From our interactions with the FAA, they tell us that this one could be implemented in about 6 months' time after direction from the roundtable. The caveat here is that the FAA doesn't believe they could continue with this window of time once we get back to pre-pandemic flight levels. In other words, we'd go back to that 1 to 5 a.m. baseline. The third option would basically be to direct the FAA to come up with an entirely new procedure that doesn't exist today, but that accomplishes the exact same outcome. That would take a minimum of 2 to 3 years to accomplish, and it could potentially accommodate all of the pre-pandemic flight level activity. So our own recommendation is that we begin at the baseline 4-hour window of time, 1 to 5 a.m. This is something that would give more immediate relief to communities that could benefit from this, while at the same time exploring a more long-term solution. But again, we're presenting this in the hopes that the roundtable could vote on these options in the next regular meeting. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Members, any questions, comments? And again, we are well past our end time, so keep it short.
Through the chair, hand us
Yes.
up. Thank you, Mr. Yekel. Refresh my memory. All of these are departure 1. These are all runway 1 departures, right?
Yeah, these are,
So,
yes, correct.
and GOBS, who is it benefiting?
San Francisco.
Yeah, the peninsula.
Okay, so it continues to make life hell for the people of Millbrae, Burlingame, and Hillsborough, but we're going to help San Francisco. Yes, no?
Well, I don't know if we're going to agree to your characterization of making life hell. The same planes will be flying out of the runway 1 that would.
I'm not
otherwise
asking you, Chair,
with
I'm
the change.
asking the airport. So when will we start looking at departures between 10 and 7, and especially 11 p.m. and 5 a.m.? When are we going to start looking at those for any kind of mitigation of low frequency noise?
Okay, this conversation is not the volume of flights leaving at runway 1.
All right, then I'm a
is
no
what
on
happens
this.
after
Thank
the
you.
fact.
I'm
So
a no.
I will not entertain that question, and you can take it up at another meeting. I'm really short on time and need to stay on topic, please.
All right, fine.
So any other questions, any other?
Through the chair.
Yes.
Aren't these incoming flights?
No, these are
This is the outbound flights.
This is outbound.
These are all departures, yes.
Yeah, this would essentially allow late night departing flights from SFO to fly up San Francisco Bay, over the Bay Bridge, make a left turn around Angel Island, fly over Golden Gate Bridge, out to the ocean before turning left to head south. Right now, these departures turn left over the peninsula to head south. That's the difference.
Yeah, so you're getting these, Member O'Connor, what it is you right now you have these flights that make a sharp left turn after runway, taking off at runway 1, and they're flying at low altitude over basically certain sections of San Francisco. So this would give those sections of San Francisco relief between 1 and 5.
Okay. I also remember there's some impact to Brisbane and South San Francisco, but I don't believe we're being asked to give an opinion on this at this moment. Aren't we being asked to come back to the next roundtable and put this to that membership?
Yes.
The question really that the airport is requesting that we put it to the full membership, which of these, what is it? Which of these avenues, how we're going to proceed with this? So the question is, do we want to put it on the agenda for the full membership?
I would think we would want to put it on the full membership. I have an opinion on how I would react to that, but I don't think that's for now. But I think that we should put it to the full membership to get their opinion on the timeline for expediting the implementation.
Okay, Mr. Widmer, and
Yes,
please keep it short.
Yes, I am. I'm supportive of going to the full membership. I would like to understand whether or not if we implement option 1, that we would then be moving forward towards implementing option 2, which is what we originally had asked for.
Good. Member Hindi or Vice Chair Hindi.
Thank you. Exactly what Mr. Widmer just said. So I want to know if you could move simultaneously 1 and 2.
Thank you. Okay. Let's open it to members of the public right now.
Thank you, Chairman. If we want to give it another second or two, but at the moment, I do not see any hands raised from members of the public for this item.
So if Mr. Yekel, to the chair, if Mr. Yekel could answer, could we move simultaneously on option 1 and 2?
I think you could.
Basically implement 1 and then notify the FAA that we want them to start the process of 6 months from the day we approve the first option 1.
Our own recommendation is, go ahead, sorry. Ricardo.
I'm sorry, Mr. Yeko. So one of the things, Vice Chair Hindi, that I had recommended is that we include language saying we agree to number 5 with the understanding that we're pursuing. I mean, we agree to number 1 with the understanding that we're pursuing number 2 or perhaps number 3. But it's certainly number 2 is one that's worth pursuing. The question is, do we need to not do number 1 to pursue number 2? And I think that's the question for the membership.
Okay. So I'm in favor of bringing it forward to the membership. Thank you.
Okay, so do we need to take a roll call or do we have enough direction to put this on the agenda? And actually, let's members of the public, we didn't have any, so we did that. So do we have enough direction to put this on the agenda or do we need to take a roll call? I'm gonna say that means we have enough direction to place it on the agenda.
Yep.
Correct?
I agree.
Very good. Okay. With that, guys, I really appreciate, I'm sorry to rush you at the end. These are important issues that really take the time, and I'm sorry we had to rush, but I do have to go make a living. So thank you very much, everybody, for your participation, and meeting is adjourned.
Okay, thank you.